It started at the company's end-of-year party, the kind of event I usually dreaded but showed up to for the sake of appearances. The kind with glittery photo booths, open bars, and awkward elbow-rubbing with people you only ever talk to on Zoom. Jessica had RSVP'd weeks ago, but that morning she told me she might not come. Feeling completely drained, she texted. If I can even stand up by tonight, it'll be a miracle. I told her to rest. Said I'd represent us both and sneak out early if it got boring. But she surprised me. I was on my second drink, making the rounds, trying to sound mildly interested in Steve from accounting's fantasy football trades when the energy in the room shifted. Heads turned toward the entrance. That's when I saw her. Jessica walked in wearing a Berg *NY dress that clung to her frame like it was sewn onto her body. I had never seen it before, not hanging in our closet, not on an Instagram haul, not even laid out on the bed with her usual "does this look okay?" She looked incredible, like she belonged on a magazine cover, but the sight didn't hit me with pride. It hit me with confusion. And a creeping sense of something else. Something colder. She was nearly 2 hours late. I stepped toward her, tried not to let the surprise show on my face. "Hey," I said, kissing her cheek. She gave me one of those quick, surface-level smiles. "Sorry," she said lightly. "We were all trying on each other's stuff after work. Tom got away from me." I nodded, but something didn't sit right. "We?" I noticed the collar of her coat, a faint lipstick smear, barely noticeable, and a red mark on the side of her neck. Not quite a bruise, but not nothing either. Like someone had gripped her gently, or maybe not so gently. A single, thin scratch ran from just below her ear to her collarbone. She saw me staring. "Oh," she said casually, brushing her fingers against the spot. "We were messing around. One of the girls gave me this giant hug and yanked my necklace. Look, it's broken." She pulled a tiny gold chain from her purse. I recognized it, a dainty piece I bought her for our anniversary 2 years ago. The clasp was snapped in half. I told myself that made sense. It could happen. That didn't stop the pit from forming in my stomach. She mingled quickly, moving from group to group with a confidence that felt just shy of manic. Laughing a little too hard. Touching people's arms when she talked. I watched her toss her head back at a joke someone made, a guy I didn't recognize, and rest her hand on his forearm for just a second too long. This wasn't her. Jessica wasn't a social butterfly. She didn't like company events. She usually clung to me the whole time and whispered snarky commentary in my ear. But tonight, it was like she'd walked out of a different life. At one point, she dropped a joke in front of everyone about my attempt to impress a French waiter on our honeymoon. He told him we wanted a baguette de l'amour instead of the wine list, she said with a smirk. Still got us a bottle, though. He's persistent. They laughed. I laughed too. But that story was ours. I'd never heard her tell anyone else. It was one of those inside memories you treasure, goofy, in asterisk mate, safe. Now it was comedy material. Later in the evening, we stood in a circle near the bar with a few people from her department, some I knew, most I didn't. Jessica was holding court, telling a story about a coworker's awkward Zoom fail. Her energy was magnetic. But then she did something she never had before. She cut me off. I was mid-sentence, adding to the conversation, nothing even remotely controversial, when she waved her hand and said, "Okay, Sam, we get it," with a little eye roll. Everyone chuckled. Some looked uncomfortable. My face went hot. She touched my arm lightly after, as if to say, "Don't take it personally," but the sting was already there. As the night wound down, people began filtering out. Jessica still seemed full of energy, chatting with the DJ about playlists and taking selfies with people she barely knew. I found myself sitting alone on a low leather couch, sipping the end of a watered-down drink, wondering who this version of her was and why she'd chosen to debut it tonight. Eventually, we left. The car ride was quiet, save for the hum of tires on wet pavement. I wanted to ask more questions about the lipstick, the dress, the scratch, the stories, all of it. But I didn't. I wasn't ready for answers I couldn't unhear. At home, she peeled off her coat and kicked off her heels with a sigh of exaggerated exhaustion. "God, my feet are *ling me," she said, flopping onto the couch. I stood near the doorway, unsure whether to press or let it go. She looked at me. "What?" she asked. "Nothing," I said. "Just, you said you felt awful earlier." She shrugged. "I guess being around people helped. You know how it is. Sometimes you just need energy." I nodded slowly. "Right?" We went to bed in silence. She curled up facing away from me, scrolling through videos with the brightness dimmed. I stared at the ceiling, wide awake, the quiet in our room stretching long and thin like a pulled thread. I wasn't angry. Not yet. But I wasn't okay either. That night marked something. A shift. A break, maybe even if I couldn't name it yet. Something had changed. And it wasn't going to change back. The morning after the party, the apartment felt quieter than usual. Jessica was already gone by the time I woke up, her side of the bed barely disturbed. No note. No love you text. Just the faint scent of her perfume clinging to the pillows and that Berg *NY dress draped across the back of a chair like an afterthought. I stared at it for a long time. The scratch on her neck, the late arrival, the lipstick, the way she laughed too hard at jokes and rolled her eyes at mine, it all replayed in my head on a loop. What bothered me wasn't just her behavior at the party. It was the fact that this wasn't a one-off. It wasn't even new. It was just the first time I had stopped pretending not to notice. I sat at the kitchen table, coffee in hand, phone screen blank. I wasn't waiting for a message. I was just scanning my memory. Things that didn't make sense began falling into place like puzzle pieces. There was that trip to Los Angeles 3 months ago. She'd been hesitant to go at first, saying she hated business travel. But then something shifted and suddenly she couldn't stop talking about it. Networking opportunities, leadership presence, visibility. She came back from that trip different. Lighter. Preoccupied. She'd mentioned a new colleague from the LA office, James, I think once or twice. A really smart guy who handled onboarding for the whole West Coast. That's all I got. A few weeks later, she took another trip. Then another. Always LA? Always with the same vague explanation. I never asked for details because I trusted her. Because I wanted to be the kind of partner who didn't snoop or second-guess. But that trust had started to feel more like denial. There were the calls she took in private. Always stepping out onto the balcony or ducking into the hallway. She used to take calls on speakerphone with me in the room, never thinking twice. Now she'd lower her voice when I entered. Smile tightly. Say just a work thing, then vanish behind a closed door. I remembered walking past the bathroom one night a few months ago. Her phone had been on the counter, screen glowing. She was brushing her teeth, music playing on her Bluetooth speaker. Then a text popped up. I didn't mean to read it. I just saw my name. Can't talk right now, Sam's home. We'll message later. She turned off the screen before I could catch the sender. When I asked who it was, she didn't flinch. Just Nora, she said. She's having another meltdown about her ex. Maybe it was. But the unease stayed. I thought about her sudden obsession with yoga. She used to hate anything that made her sweat. But out of nowhere, she was hitting 6 a.m. classes, posting stories with sweaty selfies and hashtags like #ZenZone and #selfwork. I teased her about it, she'd laughed it off. But I realized something. I'd never once seen her in a yoga class. Never met a new friend from it. And when I offered to come with her once, she froze. It's my time, she said. I need the space. And I respected that. I respected all of it. Maybe too much. There was a night in September when she came home late, past midnight. Said she was at a networking mixer that ran long. She was wearing heels and makeup even though she told me she was going to a casual rooftop hang. Her phone had been off when I called. Battery died, she said. I believed her. 2 weeks later, I found a folded receipt in her coat pocket. Dinner for 2 at a luxury restaurant, 3 courses, 2 cocktails, a bottle of wine. It was dated the same night as the networking event. I remembered holding that slip of paper in my hand, staring at the total. I had stared so long the numbers started to blur. And then I tucked it back into her coat and said nothing. Why? Because I didn't want to be that guy. The insecure husband. The accuser. The paranoid one. I convinced myself it was nothing. A work dinner. A friend. An expense account. But that night after the party, I couldn't keep the excuses straight anymore. I started going back over everything, little things I'd ignored. Times her phone was on Do Not Disturb. Her newfound secrecy with passwords. The new lingerie I never saw her wear at home. A calendar entry she once accidentally left open that said Jay's event, don't forget to bring the book. Jay? She'd said it was a women's book club. I never saw a book. Or the club. Even her tone had changed in recent months. She was short with me about small things like I was in the way. She snapped when I asked about plans or offered to help with her work stress. I'm not a child, Sam, she'd say. Or worse, I just need you to trust me. That phrase used to comfort me. Now it sounded like a dare. So I did something I hadn't done in years. I opened our shared Google account. I remembered we once synced our devices. Back when everything was transparent. Back when there were no secrets. I checked the location history. LA. Not just the downtown hotel where the conferences were held. But West Hollywood. Santa Monica. Even a beachside Airbnb once. She had never mentioned the beach. I felt sick. I went through her Instagram. Nothing overt. But there were gaps. Posts from the office or the gym but never travel pics. Never mentions of her trips at all. It was like she was hiding the whole other version of her life in plain sight. Then I did something I never imagined I would. I scrolled back through my own messages, looking for when I stopped hearing good morning texts from her while she was away. When miss you became busy day, talk later. When calls lasted minutes instead of hours. It all changed 6 months ago. It was subtle, gradual, but now that I was paying attention, it was glaring. Jessica had built another world around me, and I had been too trusting or maybe too afraid to see it. I didn't confront her that day. I didn't rage or accuse. I didn't even bring up the dress. Instead, I made a decision. If there was more, I would find it. I needed proof. Not just to confirm what I already feared, but to reclaim my sanity. Because right now, my reality was a puzzle. And every piece of it pointed to something I didn't want to name, but couldn't ignore anymore. 3 days after the company party, Jessica told me she was headed to a professional retreat. She packed a carry-on that morning with her usual efficiency, laptop, toiletries, 2 tailored blazers, and a book she never actually read. She kissed me on the cheek at the door and said she'd be back Sunday night. "Don't wait up," she added with a little wink. That should have made me smile. But instead, I just nodded. By then, the threads of suspicion were wound so tight around my brain that every word she said felt like it was meant to distract. I didn't argue. I didn't press. I let her go. That night, I sat at my desk and stared at her travel itinerary. It looked legitimate: flight to Reno, hotel booked under her name, confirmation email from her HR department approving the expense. On paper, it was airtight. But paper could lie. The next morning, I got an email from someone in her company's HR department. A guy named Alex. We'd crossed paths before, briefly, at a holiday mixer last year, and he must have remembered me. The subject line was simple: "Hey, just thought you should see this." I hesitated before opening it. My heart was already pounding. My hands hovered over the keyboard for a second too long, like part of me knew what was waiting on the other side and didn't want to see it. Then I clicked. The body of the message was short: "This isn't my business and I don't want to stir up trouble, but I saw this tagged from a mutual connection and, well, you deserve to know." There was an attachment. A single photo. A **T from Instagram. The account it came from was private, but someone had taken the liberty of capturing the post and tagging it at @newbeginnings_wedding. In the photo, Jessica was standing beside a man I had never seen before, tall, dark-haired, wearing a crisp white button-down and no tie. She was dressed in white. Not a gown, exactly, but something close, long, lacy, elegant, and unmistakably bridal. She had a champagne glass in one hand. Her other hand was wrapped around his waist. They were kissing. The backdrop was a wedding arch flanked by blush-colored flowers and a rustic wooden sign that read, "A new chapter begins." The caption below it was simple: "Couldn't be happier to witness this union. Love wins." I stared at it for a full minute before I realized I had stopped breathing. It was surreal. Like looking into a dream someone else was having, a dream that used my wife's face. I zoomed in. There was no mistaking it. The delicate gold ring on her finger was not the one I gave her. The necklace she wore was new. Her smile was genuine. Not the forced, half-curved version I'd been seeing lately, but the real kind, the kind I hadn't seen directed at me in months. My fingers moved before my brain did. I opened the county marriage registry for Nevada. Typed in her name. There it was. Filed 3 days ago. Marriage certificate issued in Washoe County. Bride, Jessica Marie Dalton. Groom, Caleb Thomas Brennan. I read the names over and over like I could change them through repetition. Jessica was married. To someone else. While still legally married to me. At first, I didn't feel anything. Just a numb blankness, like my body didn't know what emotion to assign to something so completely absurd. Then came the heat, slow, creeping, clawing its way up my spine and into my chest. Not just rage. Betrayal. Embarrassment. Disbelief. She had gone from kissing my cheek at our front door to kissing another man in front of a wedding arch in less than 24 hours. And she did it with the confidence of someone who believed she could pull it off. Because maybe she thought I wouldn't look. Maybe she believed I'd always be that trusting. That passive. Not anymore. I spent the next 2 hours gathering everything: **TS, messages, calendar entries, travel receipts. I printed them, highlighted them, made copies. I created a folder on my desktop titled Jessica, Legal, and started compiling evidence like a detective in a crime drama. I wasn't sure exactly what I was preparing for, but I knew it was going to be big. My next call was to a friend from college, Miriam. She's a lawyer, specializes in family law. I hadn't talked to her in months, but when she picked up and heard the tone in my voice, she skipped pleasantries. "Send me everything," she said. "Now." I emailed her the photos, the registry confirmation, the HR approval email, and my marriage certificate. It took her less than 20 minutes to call me back. This isn't just grounds for divorce, she said. This is bigamy, Sam. It's criminal. The word hung in the air like a fire alarm. She actually went through with it? I asked. Like, legally? Looks like it, Miriam replied. Nevada marriage law is pretty lenient about prior checks. All they care about is what you tell them. If she signed that form knowing she was still married to you, she committed a crime. I let that sink in. My wife, no, the woman I used to think was my wife, had broken the law. She didn't just cheat. She erased me. Later that day, I checked her phone location, not through anything illegal. We still had our devices synced to a shared account from years ago. She'd never bothered to shut it down. And there she was, just like she said she'd be, at a retreat. Only the retreat happened to be a boutique vineyard venue outside Lake Tahoe. Same backdrop as the photo. Same new chapter. I sat there for what felt like hours, staring at the blinking dot on the map. She wasn't hiding. Not really. She just didn't care if I found out. That realization hit harder than the kiss, harder than the marriage certificate. This wasn't just infidelity. It was erasure. A total rewrite of our history, our life, our vows. I wasn't even a footnote in her story anymore. I closed the laptop, stood up, and walked to the bedroom. Her side of the closet was still full: dresses, shoes, the earrings I got her for Christmas. I looked at them like museum pieces. Relics from a life that never actually existed. I didn't cry. Not then. I didn't yell or break anything. Instead, I felt something shift. A quiet clarity. The kind of peace that only comes when you finally stop pretending things might still be okay. She was married. To someone else. While still married to me. And now? Now it was my turn. By the time the sun rose the next morning, I was already halfway through my checklist. There would be no confrontation. No emotional scene. Jessica had crossed a line so absurd, so final, that there wasn't room for arguments or redemption arcs. She didn't just cheat, she vanished into a fantasy, started a new life while tethered to the legal remains of her old one. I wasn't going to ask her why. I was going to make sure she couldn't come back. The first call I made was to Miriam, my lawyer. We spoke for 20 minutes, covering everything from asset protection to emergency divorce filings. She had already drafted a temporary restraining order to prevent Jessica from accessing shared funds and another document freezing our joint accounts. Sam, she said, her voice calm but firm, we're going to act fast. And we're going to act smart. Trust me, this is going to be clean. I nodded even though she couldn't see me. Next, I called our bank. I explained the situation, used the phrase suspected financial misconduct, and requested a full freeze on joint checking and savings accounts. I had to go through security questions and escalate to a manager, but within the hour, Jessica's debit card was rendered useless. Her access revoked. I changed every password linked to our financial lives, credit cards, retirement accounts, even the stupid meal delivery app we both used on Sundays. One by one, every avenue of control she had was shut down. Then came the house. We owned it jointly, but the mortgage was in my name alone. That detail, once buried in a pile of paperwork, became a lifeline. I contacted the property management firm we used when we rented the place out during travel months. Explained the situation. She's out of state right now, I said. She'll likely try to re-enter the property under false pretenses. I want her denied access immediately. The manager hesitated. Do you have documentation to support this request? I have a lawyer. And proof she's married to another man. That shut down the hesitation. By noon, a private security firm had been contracted. A guard would be stationed at the property within 24 hours. Anyone not authorized would be turned away, no questions asked. I also installed a smart lock system, brand new hardware, temporary passcodes, everything managed from my phone. Jessica's old access code? Deleted. I changed the garage code too, just in case. Every trace of her in our digital home was wiped. Netflix profiles gone. Shared photo albums disconnected. Even the Wi-Fi password changed. I wasn't just locking her out, I was making it so that when she tried to log in, the world she used to know didn't recognize her anymore. By the evening, I was exhausted but clear-headed. I made dinner for the first time in weeks. Real food, not takeout. I poured myself a drink, not to drown anything, but to mark the beginning of something new. I was reclaiming what she tried to leave behind in secret. She called once that night. Blocked number. I didn't answer. The next day, she returned. I was notified by the security firm. Female arrived with luggage. Attempted to enter residence. Denied access at front gate. The image still feels surreal. Jessica, standing on the curb outside our house, suitcase in hand, staring at the place she used to call home like it had evaporated. Like someone had erased her existence from it. Which, in a way, I had. The guard told her politely that she was no longer listed on the access roster. She demanded to speak to someone. He offered to call the police and verify property records. She declined. She stood there for a few more minutes, probably trying to figure out what happened, then turned, called a rideshare, and left. I watched the security footage that night. She looked stunned. Not furious. Not heartbroken. Just stunned. Like she never thought I'd be capable of something so decisive. That was the moment I realized how she had always seen me. She thought I'd wait. Thought I'd ask her to explain. Thought I'd cry and beg and leave the porch light on. She never expected to come back and find the locks changed, her accounts frozen, her key deleted from every lock, every login, every room. She underestimated me. For the first time in months, I didn't feel powerless. I felt like myself again. A week passed. No emails. No texts. No tearful voicemails or grand apologies. I heard from her sister briefly. She said Jessica was staying with a friend. That she was dealing with a lot. I said nothing. A package arrived from Jessica's HR department. Inside were a few of her things, documents, a framed photo of us that had sat on her desk, and a company ID badge that had been cut in half. Fired. Just like that. Apparently, someone had flagged her retreat as suspicious. The marriage photo had made the rounds. The company couldn't ignore it. She was placed on leave, then quietly terminated. I didn't gloat. Didn't celebrate. I just put the box in the garage, unopened. I still hadn't spoken to her. And I didn't plan to. She wanted a new life. Now she had one. I began to take stock of my own. I canceled her memberships. Closed subscriptions she started in both our names. Cleared out the guest room where she used to take calls with the door closed. I found a pair of heels under the bed. Tossed them out. The house felt different. Still. Quiet. But no longer haunted. The first night I slept with the bedroom door open, I realized how deep the silence had become. And how peaceful it was. Jessica's wedding wasn't just a betrayal. It was my permission slip. My way out. No second guessing. No guilt. No more asking what I did wrong. She made her choice. And now I was making mine. By the second week, everything had become motion. I was done with reaction. Now it was about strategy. The shock had settled into something colder, a sense of purpose, like the part of me that had waited too long to act had finally stood up. Miriam filed the divorce papers that Monday morning. Grounds: adultery, fraud, and emotional distress. I signed them without ceremony, sitting at our dining table, the same one where Jessica and I used to eat pad thai and talk about weekend plans. I remember the sound the pen made. Clean. Permanent. Like something final had clicked into place. But this wasn't just divorce. This was criminal. Miriam had forwarded the marriage documents from Washoe County to both our state's legal registry and the Nevada Attorney General's office. I hadn't realized it at first, but when someone marries another person while still legally married, even if it's in another state, that qualifies as bigamy. And Nevada took it seriously. A week later, we got the first call from an investigator attached to the Nevada Department of Vital Records. His tone was professional but clipped, like he'd handled this before and didn't enjoy it. She listed herself as single on the marriage application, he said. That's a felony under state law. I need a statement from you and a copy of your original marriage license. And anything that proves she was still residing with you when the second marriage took place. I sent it all the next morning. That's when the real unraveling began. It turned out Caleb, the man she married, wasn't legally in the clear either. His records showed an active marriage in Arizona. Same timeline. No divorce filing on record. When Miriam saw that, she went quiet for a moment. You're looking at 2 cases of bigamy, she said. Both sides of that wedding could be facing charges. There was something almost absurd about it. Jessica, who had once given me a lecture for forgetting to recycle, was now at the center of a criminal investigation. And not for shoplifting or tax evasion, for bigamy. It was surreal. The story didn't stay small for long. One of Jessica's former colleagues, someone who hadn't liked her, apparently leaked the situation anonymously to a corporate watchdog blog. The headline wasn't subtle: mid-level manager fired after secret double marriage revealed. Within a day, it was all over internal Slack channels. My phone buzzed with messages from people I barely knew offering sympathy wrapped in digital awkwardness. Screenshot *TS of her fake retreat post circulated. The caption, "Grateful for growth, space, and soul alignment," now felt like satire. Meanwhile, my legal team combed through every corner of our shared finances. And what they found wasn't just deceitful, it was calculated. Jessica had been using company expense reports to cover travel she never disclosed. Flights to LA logged as client relations. Boutique hotel stays listed under staff development. She'd even billed a couple's massage in Santa Monica as a wellness incentive. When confronted, her former employer didn't even hesitate. They filed their own internal fraud claim against her and issued a statement distancing the company from her actions. She was effectively blacklisted. It should have made me feel vindicated. Maybe part of me did. But mostly, I just felt tired. Like I was watching the slow collapse of a structure I used to live inside. Back at home, Miriam prepared for the next phase. The divorce had to be airtight, not just for closure, but because we were now walking a legal tightrope. She might try to claim mental stress, Miriam warned. She might say this was all a breakdown, a misstep in the fog of burnout or emotional trauma. She could file counterclaims, paint you as distant or emotionally unavailable. I nodded. Let her try. We had receipts, dates, phone records, location data, photos, a literal marriage certificate. I'd given her every chance to exit clean. She chose chaos. Now she would face consequences. The discovery phase of the divorce process revealed even more. Jessica had attempted quietly to transfer money from our joint savings account into a private brokerage weeks before her retreat. The transfer had failed, blocked by the freeze Miriam had initiated just in time. But the intent was clear. She wasn't just cheating. She was planning an escape. That stung more than anything else. The idea that she hadn't simply fallen for someone else, but had spent weeks, maybe months, plotting how to leave me behind while taking whatever she could on the way out. She had smiled through it all. Shared dinners. Texted heart emojis. Even asked if I wanted to do something special for our anniversary. That was the same weekend she booked the venue with Caleb. There's something chilling about deception that isn't messy. When it's clean, efficient, administrative. Jessica didn't stumble into betrayal. She organized it. And now I was disassembling it piece by piece. We filed a formal petition for exclusive ownership of the house, citing abandonment, financial manipulation, and her criminal exposure. Miriam argued that Jessica's actions had not only jeopardized our assets but brought legal risk to any shared property. The judge agreed tentatively. A final hearing would decide. Meanwhile, Jessica broke her silence. It came in the form of a letter printed, not emailed. Hand-delivered to my lawyer's office. For pages long. Rambling, self-pitying, with no mention of Caleb by name. She called it an identity crisis. Said she felt lost and needed to reclaim something outside of the person everyone thought she was. She talked about being trapped in roles and pressured to be perfect. The language was carefully curated, like she'd Googled emotional terminology that might help her case. She never apologized. Not once. She said she was sorry it hurt me. Not sorry for what she did. That distinction mattered more than she probably realized. I didn't respond. What was there to say? The world she built had already started to cave in. Caleb was being investigated in Arizona. Jessica was under formal review in Nevada. And in our home state, a judge was preparing to rule on whether she had any remaining claim to the life she abandoned. The hearing was set for the following Thursday. Jessica showed up in a gray blazer and minimal makeup. Caleb was not with her. She didn't look defiant. She looked drained. Like someone who had built an entire fantasy and finally realized the foundation was made of air. Her attorney tried the narrative we expected. Emotional distress. Workplace burnout. A plea for compassion. They didn't contest the facts, how could they? They just tried to dress them in sympathy. Miriam stood calmly presenting our case. The timeline. The documentation. The criminal charges pending in Nevada. The financial deception. The unauthorized travel expenses. The attempted transfer of funds. The marriage certificate. The judge reviewed the evidence for a long time. When he finally spoke, his words were careful. This is not a case of emotional confusion. This is a pattern of calculated behavior. The court finds sufficient grounds to proceed with dissolution in favor of the petitioner with prejudice toward the respondent's claims of shared equity. Translation: she loses. House. Majority of assets. Future claims. Gone. And then, as if punctuating the finality of it all, the judge added, the respondent's other legal entanglements are not for this court to resolve. But they speak to a broader pattern that cannot be ignored. It was done. Not with a bang. But with a signature. The courtroom emptied. Jessica didn't look at me. She just gathered her papers, walked out the side door, and disappeared into the hallway like a shadow falling into dusk. Outside, I stood for a moment in the spring sunlight, breathing in air that felt new somehow. Crisp. Quiet. It wasn't joy I felt. It was relief. Jessica's collapse had begged *n with a lie, then multiplied by 10. But in the end, it gave me something I never expected. A way out. Clean. Legal. Final. The days after the ruling felt still, like the eye of a storm that had finally passed. I thought it would feel triumphant. Instead, it just felt quiet. Jessica's unraveling continued, but this time I wasn't watching it from a distance. It was all over the feeds. *TS of her wedding, comments from coworkers, rumors spreading like wildfire through LinkedIn and niche industry forums. Her reputation crumbled almost overnight. Then came the verdict from Nevada, guilty of misrepresentation and filing false legal documents. It wasn't prison, but it was enough. She was fined, sentenced to 200 hours of community service, and placed under probation. The charge of bigamy was softened through a plea deal, but it stuck on her record, something that would follow her forever. Her employer wasted no time. They issued a formal statement disavowing her conduct and terminated her within 24 hours of the ruling. Her name was removed from internal databases like she'd never worked there. The office that once held her framed diplomas now held boxes of someone else's ambitions. Social media turned fast. The same people who toasted her soul alignment weeks ago now shared memed *TS and dissected her downfall like a cautionary tale. And in the middle of it all, I got a call. It was from her company's board. They offered me a position, senior auditor, the same role Jessica had been angling for the year before. A promotion I had quietly passed on to support her. This time I didn't hesitate. I accepted. And when I walked into the boardroom on my first day, I sat in the chair she used to lean back in with confidence and watched the room go quiet. No gloating. No bitterness. Just closure. The final divorce papers came a week later. No alimony. No joint claims. The house, savings, and majority of assets awarded to me. The judge had taken everything into account, the betrayal, the fraud, the public fallout. The law had done what emotion never could. It gave me a clean break. I sat on the back porch the day they arrived, coffee in hand, watching the wind shift through the trees. There was no celebration. Just stillness. And relief. It wasn't the ending I imagined for our story. But it was better. Jessica gave me pain, yes. She gave me confusion and sleepless nights and 1,000 unanswered questions. But she also gave me something I never expected: freedom. The kind that doesn't come easy. The kind that forces you to let go of the version of yourself that clings to broken things. I didn't feel sorry for her anymore. And I didn't feel sorry for myself either. She got her new beginning. And so did I.